Welcome everybody. My name is Lavelle Jacobson, and I am an associate marriage and family therapist. I work with Carol Teitelbaum, who many of you know. And I'm honored to be here. It's been a while since I've kind of spoken out in this kind of a venue, and I'm just honored to be able to talk about this topic and to talk with Carol and work with Carol. Of course, that's a huge honor. And I just appreciate all of you coming. Grief is not always something that's real exciting to talk about, and yet Carol named it Good Grief tonight, and I'm glad she did, because it's a topic that I love to talk about and I love to work with people on, because in the end it can be good. And that's my hope, that as we talk this evening that you'll kind of come to that realization too. That grief can be a really, really good process, and the benefits of it can be really, really powerful. Can you all hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay, first disclaimer, actually the only one. The pens on your table, I just don't want any damage happening. So the pens on your table say permanent marker on the outside. So if you use those, we'll do an exercise a little bit later. Make sure you put a couple pieces of paper underneath it so you're not damaging the tables or your books or your clothes or anything, okay? All right, thanks. So in reflecting about grief and how I ended up here as a counselor that specializes in grief, I looked back into my early years, and understanding grief and experiencing grief and watching grief started pretty early for me. When I was 11, my parents had provided a pretty stable home, a pretty happy upbringing. And they continued to do so, but what we did was we moved to Africa. And we moved to Juba, South Sudan. It was in 80 or 81. And if any of you remember those days, what you were seeing on TV here was the commercials trying to get people to give money to people that were starving in Africa. And what you saw on your screen were little black babies, toddlers, kids, with stick-thin arms, distended bellies, orange hair. They were starving. And you saw those on your TV screen, and I saw them every day. So we lived there in Juba, South Sudan for several years. My parents started a clinic. And the amount of grief that was experienced there because of the famine that was happening was extensive. I just have to say that. We ran a mother-child health clinic where we would, every morning, we'd have a big, huge pot, bigger than these tables, of porridge, and the mothers could bring their children to feed them a healthy meal one time a day. But it was impossible to save them all, and some mothers weren't coming and bringing their kids, and so a lot of children died right around us at that time. And I was just at that age where I loved babies and I loved little kids. And yet I knew that many of them weren't going to make it because there was just not enough food for anybody. And the most vulnerable were the first to go. So we lived kind of on the edge of this big city called Juba, which was really just a lot of grass huts. And the smaller huts went out into the plain, so our house was kind of on the edge of the city, and then out, the huts just kept going out to the grasslands. And almost every night we heard the grief, because it was loud, and it was all night long. And we would hear the drums and the wailing and the crying and the processions through the night, and we knew that someone had died. And it could have been someone dying from a tropical disease, or someone had lost a baby, or someone had had a tribal warfare fight and had died that way. But we were very aware of it. And even at that young age, I was really clear that something was going on, and it was really, really horrific. And I had to figure out how to get used to it. Had to figure out what to do with the pain that was all around me. But one of the things I learned when I was there was that pain and joy could coexist. So despite the pain that I saw all around me and the families that I knew had lost children or family members, the people that we knew and were in relationships with, friendships with, were some of the most joyful, happy, vibrant, alive people that I've ever met. So somehow, in their experience of grief, despite the poverty, despite knowing that they didn't know where their next meal was coming from if they had one, they still found joy in that pain. And that impacted me a lot. What I saw was that they figured out that grief, if they worked together to grieve it, brought them a sense of community, right? They grieved together. It brought them a sense of a deeper spirituality. They figured out what to do with the whole spirituality piece because they had to. It brought them healing because they expressed it actively. So they were able to heal. And eventually, they were able to find joy in the midst of their pain. So those are kind of the 4 goals that I've come up with. The goals of grief are a better sense of community, that we feel supported and loved and connected in a sense of community if we grieve well and work together well in our grief. That we find a deeper sense of spirituality and that we find healing in expressing our grief and that eventually we find joy. So we came back when I was in high school, we came back to the States, and in college, this is a silly side note, in college, someone said to me, Lavelle, you need to write down a list of all the things you're looking for in a man. Did anybody do that? Am I the only weirdo? Okay, good. I'm not getting too late. So, what was that?
She did it too late.
She did it too well. It took me a while. Once I did it. So I wrote this list, and I had the must-haves, and then I had the optionals. Side note, I put optional, I wanted to have a musician. I wanted to marry somebody who's a musician, and I did. But one of the things that was a must-have for me, because of what I've been through, I wrote on there, and I can't believe I did this because I was in my early 20s, I said I want somebody who understands suffering. For me, going from where I had lived to going to this college in Washington State, and seeing all these easy-peasy life guys who'd never experienced anything serious, it was kind of like, well, they don't have any depth. I'm not interested. So I realized that for me, that was an important part of who I am, an important part of what I believe to be one of the benefits of our experience in dealing with pain. So here I am now. I've become a counselor, and I was asked to work at Betty Ford Center. And one of my jobs when I worked there almost 5 years, and one of my jobs was working with the grief, with the women in the halls. And my job was to lead 3 or 4 grief groups a week. And in addition to my own losses that I've had through the years, I've learned so much from the women that I worked with about grief and the grieving process and how it works, and what we can do to support each other and help each other through that process. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that experience and what I've learned. And let's start with the boring stuff, okay? Let's start a little bit with, what is the definition of grief? But before I do that, let me say this. Whoever you are here today, I don't know if you're a professional, I know we have some professionals, mental health professionals here, and I know we have some people who are here because of the topic of grief. My goal for you today is both to help you understand grief in your own life, and then if you're a professional, to understand what to do with grief in the lives of the people that you work with. So it's kind of a both and right there. So a couple definitions, we're just going to breeze through these really quick because there's not one definition of grief. There are a lot of them. And that is because grief is such an overarching thing, it's impossible to define it, in my opinion. So the dictionary says it's deep sorrow. Not surprising. It's an emotional reaction to a loss. And I like this part. Grief is neither a pathological condition nor a personality disorder. That's good to know. Grief is the conflicting feelings. Now I like this because if you've experienced grief, you know this. Grief does not have one set of feelings. Grief is not all sadness. Grief is sadness and relief. It's anger and love. It's hate and passion. It's all those things. And when we feel those and we think, what is going on? I am experiencing all this and it's conflicting. Just know you're normal. This is a concept I wanted to bring out, the feeling of reaching out for someone who's always been there and they're no longer there. So losing somebody that's been there. Or the feeling of reaching out for someone who's never been there and they're still not there. This is my favorite definition because I think it speaks to the fact that we can grieve anything. So grief is a reflection of a connection that has been lost, even if it's a negative connection. So we don't grieve anything that we feel indifferent about. If you feel indifferent about it, you're not going to really be sad that you lost it. But if you are connected in some way, positive or negative, you will grieve it if it's gone. So, for example, you may grieve that your father may not have been present or available for you. That's a negative connection. He wasn't there. And so you grieve that when he passes or even before. If your mom is abusive or whatever, any relationship that has kind of a negative thing, you'll grieve that because of the negative connection. When we are born, we know what a mom is supposed to be and a dad is supposed to be. And no one tells us this. It's not like they hand you a baby manual. This is what your mom is supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to do. You just know a mom is supposed to be nurturing, caring, loving, supportive. A dad is supposed to be present, loving, or whatever, whoever your caregiver is. And if that's not there, whatever the gap is between what we believe we need and what's available to us, that is the gap that we grieve. So even if they're alive or we have a relationship with them, we can be grieving them. We can grieve over people, whether we know them or not. How many of you grieved when Robin Williams died? How many grieved when Princess Diana died? Absolutely. We had a connection. Someone in one of my grief groups said, every day I grieve for the 53,000 men who died in Vietnam that I never ever met. He had a connection to those people that he'd never met, but he was grieving them. So we can grieve people, places. I grieve not living in Washington, because that's where my heart is. That's where my home, where it feels like home for me. Sometimes I grieve not being in Africa, smelling the tropical fruit, beautiful place. Or things. I had a patient one time who, her greatest loss was she had been in the Hurricane Katrina, and she had built this, she had redone this beautiful, one of the old Victorian homes down there, and she had basically redone every inch of that space. And when the hurricane came through, she lost that home, and it was as if she had lost a person because of the connection to that space. So now that we know what grief is, let's talk real briefly about grief in recovery. How is it different in recovery than it is for everybody else? What's the difference? And I just want to point out a couple things really quickly. First of all, we can't heal what we don't feel. And when we're in our addiction, our goal is to not feel. So we're masking as much as we can. We're trying to not feel. And even if we may cry, we may grieve at some level, we're not getting to the deep level of grief. So if we're in our addiction for a period of time, we're not feeling what we need to feel. And then additional factors, we have additional losses because of our use. All the losses add up, they kind of get backed up with us. When we get sober, we lose our drug of choice. Some of the most profound, poignant, heartbreaking letters have been to the loss of their drug of choice. When we do the grief, when we do some of the assignments, a really, really powerful connection. And in addition to that, all the additional losses because of the abuse. So this is how I picture it. So you're on the blue side over there in your addiction. It's a little bit rough. You feel a little bit of emotion. But when you get into recovery, all of a sudden, everything that's backed up, everything that you did in your disease, plus the fact that you lost your drug of choice, all of a sudden you have a tsunami on your hands, an emotional tsunami. So when you get into recovery, it's really, really difficult to start dealing with that because you're not used to feeling, and then you've got this tsunami of emotion coming. So it can be really powerful, and that's why we need support, right? When I would lead grief groups at Betty Fordson, I don't know how many women came into my room and said, Lavelle, I can't do this grief group thing. I just can't. If I start to cry, I will never, ever stop. Or they'd say, if I start to cry, I don't think I'll survive it. Right? Because that tsunami is so huge. So we have to have the support of others in recovery, in dealing with our grief. The danger of not dealing with our grief is what? In recovery? Relapse. Yeah, absolutely. So when we are in recovery, if we're not getting through that grief, that is a huge relapse trigger, a huge reason to start drinking again, because we might start opening up and then we slam it shut because we can't feel it, we don't want to feel it, and so we either go back to using because that's what we've always done to mask our pain. So we've got to have the support of people. Let's talk a little bit about the grieving process. Let's see. Well, first of all, as a therapist, and especially with working with people who are in recovery, the job that we have as a therapist is, first of all, to create the safe space because of the tsunami. And that is true for everyone. Our job is to create a safe space, create moments where people can come and intentionally feel their feelings, create space for their emotions. And then we have to encourage them. Now, most people will say, I'm not sure I want to do that. I'm not sure I want to write that letter. I'm not sure I want to do that assignment. But encourage them and then trust. We all know what our grief needs. If we trust ourselves and do our very best, we can pretty much kind of walk the path okay. We just have to have support to do it. So a couple of the assignments that we do, this may be familiar to some of you. This is just the ways of accessing the emotions. We do what's called a loss timeline. We list all of our losses, which ones are still active, which ones are we ready to address. So when we list our loss timeline, this is from when I was born up until now. What are the things that have been significant losses for me? How do I feel about them now? Have I grieved them? Are they still incomplete? What do I need to do? Then we do grief letters addressing the specific loss. And then we do rituals to honor the loss. So all of these are ways of accessing the emotions, ways of finding how to feel about the things that we aren't sure we want to feel about. We kind of run away from them a lot of times. And so it's creating that environment where we can do that. I thought this was going to be handed out to you. So if you want this PowerPoint, let me know. I have cards here. You can email me and I'll send that to you. Because it's important to look at what are the types of losses. There are lots of different types of losses. We often think of just death, but there are plenty of other losses that we might not think of, and we think, what's going on? I'm feeling all this stuff. Well, we're grieving something that you might not have thought of as a loss. Especially the last one here, positive losses. Any change in our pattern that's a significant change can feel like a loss. Graduation, retirement, empty nest, they all seem like great things, right? Sometimes we really grieve them. Okay, so before we do that, how are we doing on time? 15? Okay. I want to take a little bit of time and do an experiential activity with us here. So everybody put down your pens, or whatever you have. And just, we're going to do a quiet little meditation, and we're going to pretend for a couple minutes that we're in a grief group. And we're going to do a little experiential thing. You don't have to share if you don't want to. If we have time to have a couple people share, we'll do that. So just get comfortable in your chair, and I'm going to read what I call our introduction meditation that I use in our grief group. And it's a way of centering us when we get into our grief group. How do we get here? And get intentional about grieving our losses. So I'm going to read it, and then we'll do an exercise together, if you're willing, about your own losses in your life. What are the things that have been painful for you? And we'll just spend a couple minutes looking at those for ourselves. Okay? Take a nice deep breath. If you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. And just listen to the words and notice what comes up for you as I read. If there's anything that you feel or anything that stands out for you, that feels true for you, that feels like something you want to do or experience or feel. So give yourself permission to acknowledge that even though this is a seminar you come to, you're a human who has losses. And we're going to take just a few moments paying attention to that wound or those wounds, whatever they are. This is called I Am Here to Grieve. I am here. I have hurried around and I have come here to grieve. To land in the midst of the grief that I have been running from. To do the work of feeling. Actively grieving the losses in my life. I choose to be here. I choose this work. I surrender to this process. I know that what I resist only grows, so I let go and accept that this is my work today, here, and now. I will tell the story of my loss, my loss, my loss. I allow myself to feel what I feel, whatever it is. I give myself permission. I am here. I am here to grieve. And in the process of grieving, I know, slowly, with work, time, love, and support, I will heal. Just notice what came up for you, if there was anything that stood out or that you felt more strongly than other things. And just acknowledge that to yourself. Noticing that for yourself is good information for you about where you are in your grief, about the losses in your life. When you're ready, we're going to do a little exercise together, just for a couple minutes. On your table, there are some blank sheets of paper and some markers. And I'd like everybody to take a marker and a piece of paper, or two or three if you want to protect the paper, or the pages, or the table underneath. And when you have your paper and your pencil, I want you to draw on it a picture of a heart. Make it nice and big as the paper if you can. And this is a heart that represents your heart. So just draw a nice big heart. Now on that heart, if you think about when you were born, most likely you didn't have much damage to that heart, right? You were born a pretty perfect, fresh, new, brand new little baby. But as life happened, losses happened, right? So this is our chance to depict what has happened to us in our life. We're just going to take a couple minutes to do it. So you might pick a couple of the more significant losses that you think of when you think of losses in your life. And if you are willing to draw it in some way, great. If it helps to use words, you can do that. But if there's a way of drawing a symbol or something that represents that loss on your heart, I want you to do that. So maybe we'll take a couple minutes doing that. What are the losses that you experienced in your life? The significant 3, 4, 5, maybe a couple. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll do the next step in just a second. As you're drawing, just notice any feelings that might come up for you. Are you connected with the power that loss had in your life, the impact that it had? When you're ready to go to the next step, this is the step that I want you to connect with, and that is, what is the impact that it did have on your life? So if there's a way that you can depict on your heart how that impacted you, do that. So let me give you a couple examples. I have my folder of all the hearts I've done through the years, or at least some of them. Here's one. One of the things I only partially did it. I built a brick wall around the edges of my heart. That loss created me protecting my heart with a brick wall. That's what that did to me. It also tore my heart, so I tore my heart. So that's just a couple examples. So however you want to depict what it did to your heart, you can choose 1 or 2 or however many you want to do. There's a way to describe or demonstrate how that impacted you, how that felt. That's it. So are you noticing a little more connection to understanding what that did for you and what that felt like? So we're going to continue on, but what I would do next if this was in group would be, I would ask people to take highlighters, and we don't have enough yellow highlighters. But I'd ask you to take your yellow highlighter and highlight those that are active for you still. What are the ones that still feel hot, active, incomplete, like they need some work? And that gives us a lot of information about where to start with our grief. So I want to just open it up. If there's 1 or 2 maybe people that would like to share maybe what you wrote on your heart, really, really briefly what your experience was as you did that. Is there anyone that wanted to see what that was like for you? Yeah?
Sure, I will. My pattern that I noticed with me from the time that I was a child, emotions that I was never able to feel and identify with, and then it led up to mental loss, divorce, and then it went into the coldness And this keeps coming up, the ice wall, the protective wall, and the hardening of emotions that's baggage that I'm feeling around. Like a bag of rocks.
Yeah, great descriptions of what it feels like when you go, yes, absolutely. The walls, the ice, the coldness, the aloneness, that I want to separate from people because I'm afraid. Absolutely beautiful, thank you. Yeah. Anyone else before I go?
2016, this little girl died, daughter of like my surrogate son. And because I had previous tragedy, it was almost like it would scrape a hardened scab and it just opened it up kind of again. And because I'm codependent and I take on the feelings of others, it seemed like, because I now have some recovery in that department, I was fighting that off almost. You know, that even though I felt my own grief, the parents' grief, I felt like I was taking it on as if it were mine. And
Absolutely.
anyway, I put her on there, on this, my heart too. Felt good to do
honoring her. Felt good to do that and to honor her and the impact that she had. And you know, your experience is very common one that parents often feel, or a spouse will feel, that grief of watching someone else grieve. Absolutely. Yeah. This is going so quickly. I wanted to get into kind of the process of grief and the stages. So when we first start looking at grief, we've put it all out there. What are all the losses that I've had? And then what are the ones that are highlighted that I need to work on, that I'm ready to work on? And, you know, the stages of grief are not neat. Right? Can anybody relate to this?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So when we talk about the stages of grief, and this is part of what we're talking about tonight, is how do we get through those stages? And the truth is, we get through those stages by going whatever direction our heart goes, right? Where it's not one of these, I'm going to do this stage, and then I'm going to do the next stage, and then I'm going to do the next stage. A stage can last about 2 minutes in my life. And so it's really paying attention to what is it that I'm feeling. But I do want to cover some of the stages of grief that are kind of from the Kubler-Ross model. Because I think one of the things, I would say 90% of what I do in grief groups or in grief counseling is normalizing the experience of grief. What you're experiencing, 90% of the time is normal for someone who's grieving. And so that's why these stages, I think, are helpful to say, okay, this is normal. It's normal within the first, especially for people that are in shock with the immediate loss, to experience some denial that this isn't happening. I can't believe it. No, this isn't possible. How would this be happening? That's normal. There's a stage called denial, and it happens sometimes in the beginning, sometimes halfway through, sometimes at the end. There are parts that you'll experience a lot of anger. And that anger almost always comes out sideways. So sometimes it comes out of the person who you've lost, or the situation you've lost. Sometimes it comes out of the cat. And you kick the cat, or you kick the dog, right? Or you yell at your spouse, or you yell at your kids. Because that anger is just there. And sometimes it takes some work to figure out where it's coming from and where we need to put it. The bargaining, you'll hear a lot of, what if I had? And especially around addiction, what if I had helped her get into treatment? Or what if I had, not been so enabling? Or what if I had all these different things? That's the bargaining that we experience. Depression, can I really go on? This can range from just low-level depression to, even suicidality. How is it possible for my life to go on? I just can't imagine going on with this loss. And then eventually acceptance. I can go on. And I like how I put it on here. I don't like reading off the screen, but I like this. Acceptance is not being all right or okay with what has happened. It is about accepting the reality of the loss, that it is a permanent reality. In other words, this isn't going away. I accept that. It's kind of the opposite of denial. And I accept that this is reality now. there used to be people that would say, okay, by a year in, you're supposed to be at this stage of grief, and by 6 months in, you're supposed to have experienced this. And I don't believe that. Grief is so different for everybody. It's a journey, and we don't know how long it is. I always say there are a certain number of tears for each loss. It might be this many, and it might be as long as this room. We don't know how many it is. But the more tears we cry, the more we get it out, the further along in our process we get. Our job is to keep moving forward. Okay, I'll go ahead. One of the visuals that I like to talk about as far as the journey of loss, of grieving our losses, is, you know, in the Olympics they have the luge. You know what that is, where there's this tunnel kind of thing, this path, and then there's the trolley or whatever they call it. I should know these things before I talk about it. And people sit in that, and is this a sled? Yes, sled, that's right, okay. So people sit in and they try and get down the mountain as fast as they can, right? So our goal isn't to get through grief as fast as we can, but our goal is to get smoothly through the journey of grief, right? And when we have things that stop us up, so say someone throws some rocks in the path, that slows our speed down quite a bit, and sometimes it can even make us stop. So our job is to figure out, is there anything that's keeping me stuck, and how can I move through that? Am I feeling stuck because I feel so guilty, or am I feeling stuck because I feel so angry? What is it that's having me stuck, and how do I move those rocks out of my path? So that's the concept of the journey. As a grief counselor, I like this quote by David Kessler. To feel too much is danger, and to feel too little is tragic. Just from my own experience, I worked at Betty Ford for several years, and during that time I was working full-time, I was getting my master's degree, and I had experienced significant trouble with infertility, and so I was doing infertility treatments through that time. So you can imagine what my emotions were doing. And then I got pregnant and I had my daughter. And I think being a new mom and listening to 3 or 4 grief groups a week, I started to get what I know now to be compassion fatigue. And as a counselor, I think because I was a new mom and I was feeling everything and I was so busy and so tired, I no longer had the ability to feel kind of at a balanced level. So I felt too much, and I was a danger to myself. And I eventually burnt out and took a couple years of work off and have rebuilt that part of me, that compassion, that ability to be present with people, their ability to connect with people on an emotional level in a safe way. So this says a lot to me, that as people in this profession, if you work as a mental health professional and you're working with people in grief, be very, very careful about your own heart and your own balance in your own life. I was, especially toward the end, I was very clear. This is not okay. This is not healthy. And I made choices to make sure that changed, and I was able to take care of myself. We are not able to be there for someone when we're not able to be there for ourselves. And that is so clear, especially when you're working with grief. David Kessler says this, and I think it's so helpful. It's about building rituals. One of the things I've learned is building rituals, pacing myself, building ways of making sure that I'm taking care of myself. And this is one that I think is really important. No one leaves their grief with me. When they walk out of the room, they take it with them. That's theirs. They deserve the dignity of their own experience. And visualizing that. Actually visualizing that they're taking that bag with them. And I sometimes visualize my own self with my protective but soft protection. Finding rituals and completions. I told you I had a little girl. One of the things that I use, and this is really probably strange, I do things like I'll wash my hands, concept of washing things off. When I was taking birthing classes, maybe this will be helpful for you. If you just think I'm weird, that's okay. When I was taking birthing classes, I was taught at each contraction to do a completion breath. And I had to do it out loud. So it was really weird. But I had to breathe out as forcefully as I could and do it out loud. And I do that sometimes. And I don't do it in front of Carol. Or anybody. Because it's a powerful physical way of saying, okay, I've done my work. I'm done with this energy. I'm not angry about it, but I'm forcefully saying, okay, this is no longer needed to be part of me. And it actually is really, really helpful. So if you want to be a weirdo like me, go for it. Finding balance in your life. When we deal with grief, especially on a consistent basis, there's light and there's dark in our life, and we spend a lot of time in the dark. And I say this to the people in grief group as well. You've spent an hour and a half in grief group. It's felt dark. There's been a bunch of laughter and some lightness too, but it's felt dark. Go do something fun. Go do something that fills that up again. Exercise, all that. Get support when you need it, of course. Find what you need to take care of you. So that is all I have. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that something can help you for you tonight.
Is everybody breathing? So actually we're going to do that breath that you didn't want to do.
And we all have to do it?
This is a great way to let go of anxiety. So I want you all to do it with me. To put your feet on the floor, feel your butt on the chair. You're going to take a nice deep breath in to the count of 4. I'll do it first so you can see what to do. So we're going to go inhale 4, hold 6. Inhale 4, hold 6. And that helps let go of anxiety. Doesn't it feel good?
I didn't know you were Iraqi.
You feel your shoulders go down. So I'm going to talk about the grief and loss of our inner child. But I'm going to start with this poem. Can you hear me okay?
No.
Yeah. Okay. No? I'm going to start with this poem from David White. It's called The Well of Grief. Those who will not slip beneath the still surface on the well of grief, turning down through the black water to the place that we cannot breathe, will never know the source from which we drink, the secret water, cold and clear, nor find in the darkness glimmering the small round coins thrown by those who wish for something else. When I was in Italy, we went to an Etruscan well, my friend Deborah and I, and the well was so deep, it was from the 12th century. It was so deep you couldn't see anything but black. And all around the dirt around the well were coins. And I said, David White was here. And it's true that nobody wants to go in that well. It is so scary because, like Lavelle was saying, people start to cry and they're afraid they'll never stop. And I always tell them, your body won't let you do that. Your body will get tired, you'll pass out, you'll fall asleep. You don't go on forever. Nothing goes on forever. But grief feels like it's going to go on forever. And what I wanted to talk about is finding our inner child. Let's see, how do I do this? Anybody who was abused as a child lost their innocence. And once you lose your innocence or your trust, it takes a long time to get trust back if you've lost trust. But it's impossible to find your innocence again because someone stole that from you. So when you're talking about the list of losses, that's an important loss. If you're an abused child, you've lost that ability to be that free little child that you once were. But through healing and recovery work, you can find that inner child, because the good news is that little spark of that inner child never really goes away. One of my clients said, it's like I'm a diamond or an emerald or a ruby that my parents or whoever my abuser was covered in mud. And so you couldn't see the sparkle anymore, and you couldn't see the color anymore, but it was still there under the mud. And recovery is really brushing. And it's not wiping, it's brushing. It's painful. It takes a long time. You can't just go and it's over. It's brushing. When we talk about doing grief and doing grief groups, some of the things that happened 40, 50 years ago, but we never got a chance to grieve it. Some of the things happened, what I put on my paper when I was 2 years old. My father was driving a truck, and this is before we had safety glass. And this man who was behind us was busy looking at a girl in short shorts. And so he put his foot on the gas instead of the brake. And my mother was holding my brother, and I was in the middle of my mother and father, and it was my second birthday. And I went right through the window, onto the pavement, and cut my lip off, cut my head. And my mother kept those pictures of me, all bloody, and I thought, 8 by 10 glossy color pictures. And every now and then when I was cleaning a drawer or something, I would find them, and I'm like, why did you keep that? And I was constantly reminded of that wounded child, that she was holding on to my brother, and I went flying. And what does that say? So when I got my baby book, and my brother's baby book, when I got older, he got $100, $200, and this is in 1943. That's a lot of money. $50, $20. Mine's $5, $3, $2. What's that about? Well, men were much more important in our culture than girls were. Girls were like that. So there was another grief. It's like, well, why wasn't I important? And then that got validated when I saw those pictures. Yeah, he was held on to. I was let go. And so that's, he was 3.5 years old. It wasn't like he was the baby. So this little child, what does it look like? So there she is sitting with her little child at the beach. See the little child in the eye? They're always with us. It's our greatest asset. It's where all of our feelings come from. That little child inside. And the little child is located right here in your solar plexus. Right behind your belly button. Is where they live. And that's why people who don't deal well with their feelings usually get diseases around that area of their body. Spastic colon, colitis, irritable bowel, ulcers, constipation, because we're pushing down the feelings. They have to go somewhere, pushing, and then they end up attacking us right here. So not only does the little child have all these wonderful things, where there's light, there's shadow. If we didn't take care of our little child, they're going to act out. And sometimes our little child acts out and gets us in trouble. John Bradshaw said that when his child came out, he said, I don't like our diet. Diet's boring. I want to choose the food that we eat. And John said, I don't know about that. He goes, no, it's boring, and I'm not going to eat. I'm going on strike. He said, okay, I'll give you a week. You can choose our diet for a week. So it was full of French fries and cake and hamburgers and ice cream. And after the end of the week, he had to put another notch in his belt. And he was bloated and sick to his stomach. And then he sat down with the child and said, this isn't working. And the child said, but I never got those things. It's another grief. I didn't get those things when I was growing up. So there's so many things we don't even think of as grief. He's grieving the loss of choosing foods, and his friends all got those foods, and he didn't get those foods. He goes, well, I'm going to promise you that you can have these things once in a while, but I can't let you be in charge of the food. You're not capable, and we're not feeling well. And so now our health is going to be at risk. So many grown-ups feel like their child is grown up, they're fine, they don't have to deal with that. In fact, a lot of people, if I talk to them about their inner child, they go, what? I don't want that little brat. Why would I want that little brat? It just causes me trouble. Or she causes me trouble. Because that's the best part of us, and we don't want to lose that. And so much of that little child was already lost, and that child's depending on us, the adult, to make sure we don't lose any more. And to make sure that when we get in a relationship, that person knows who we are and knows that child, so they don't deliberately push our buttons, knowing that we're going to get triggered by that. So some boys don't grow up. Some girls don't grow up either, but a lot of boys don't grow up. It's not because they don't want to, nobody ever showed them how. Or the men they saw in their family, they weren't very good role models. They were mean, they were abusive, using drugs and alcohol. So what was there to model after? So they started using at a really young age because that numbed out all that pain from the losses they had. And so once you start using drugs and alcohol, you're not maturing emotionally. So you could be 45 or 50 or 70 and still 14 inside, or 12 or 10 or 8. That little kid part of you is still just a little kid. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of people who react like a little kid when something happens. They throw a tantrum, they get angry, they're hurt really easily. So that's the Peter Pan syndrome for boys, and the Puer, the Puella for girls. So that's what I said, that they can be irresponsible, needy, dependent. So the divine child is the part that we want to nurture and help grow. And the divine child is a part of us, the spiritual part of us that's connected to our higher power. It's the most wonderful part of us. It's intuitive and creative and fun-loving. And we don't want that part to go away. But so many people think it's the other childish part that we want to keep around. But that's the one that acts out and gets us in trouble. So a modern day Peter Pan was Michael Jackson. Can you see that? Recognize that? He was just a little kid. Yes, he did things that were very wrong, but he was a little kid. And in that movie, Spotlight, where they interviewed the priest in Boston, who they did that big expose about the priests who were abusing altar boys. One of the psychologists that was in that movie said when he interviewed a lot of the perpetrators that were priests, he found that most of them were really 12-year-old boys sexually, that they had never grown past that. And they truly felt they were 12-year-old boys with 12-year-old boys. They didn't see themselves as an adult being with a child. And it's kind of hard to imagine that. But if you can think about whatever they went through and how stunted their sexuality was, you can understand. It doesn't make it right by any means. And anybody who knows me knows that I don't feel that way. So have you ever laughed so hard you got the hiccups? Anybody? Laughed so hard you got the hiccups? No. Nobody? One or two? Laughed so hard you started crying? More? Someone said no to you and you threw a temper tantrum? More hands there. We're so angry that you had to wait in line? Oh. How dare they? Cried when you saw a dog needed a home? Got so mad you wanted to hit someone? You're a little child in control. And we don't want them in control of our life. We want a good parent and adult running our life as much as possible and letting that child out when it's safe. Whenever your emotions are stronger than the situation warrants, you can be pretty sure that the child is out, right? That's not your adult having emotions bigger than the situation. So a 5-year-old running around a 40-year-old frame is a hurt, angry, fearful little boy or girl calling the shots, making adult decisions. Yeah? So who would send a child out to do an adult's job? Anybody? No? Okay, we do that every day. Now you're getting a relationship. You've got 2 5 or 10-year-olds trying to relate to each other. 2 wounded children trying to relate to each other and have a relationship. It doesn't work too well. Yeah. And that creates a lot of anxiety, feeling afraid, insecure, small, lost, lonely. So this is what it looks like inside. Anybody see the movie Inside Out?
Inside Out.
Anybody see Inside Out? Oh, if you haven't, you need to see it. It's all about feelings.
Yeah.
How important feelings are. And you can't heal what you can't feel, right, Lavelle? Can't heal what you can't feel. So this is a boy, a man. He's got that critical parent on the top, the adult in the middle, and that little kid on the bottom having a temper tantrum. Anybody relate?
Yeah.
And here's the woman, nasty grandma on the top, and adult in the middle, and the little girl crying on the bottom. I don't have much time, and I want to do a guided imagery, so I think we'll see if there's, okay. So we're going to do a little guided imagery. I don't have too much time left, so I want to make sure that we get this in. So if you would, please put your feet on the floor. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes. And I want you to think about that little child you once were and a loss that little child might have gone through. And it might be something that you drew on the heart. So see the face of your little child. Maybe confused, maybe hurt, maybe tears, maybe angry. Whatever it is, it's fine. And imagine you as a loving, kind, wise adult sitting next to that child, holding that child's hand. And asking the child to share with you what that pain was, what the loss was. And feeling the warmth of that hand in your hand. Feeling the warmth of the heart with the heart. And if you don't have a good relationship with your child yet, that child may not trust that you really will be there. And that's okay. If that's the case, then just tell that child, I'm learning how to be a good parent to you. And I'm going to keep practicing until I get it right. I'll keep practicing until you trust me. So just let that child tell you whatever he or she is feeling, whatever he or she needs from you. Whatever pain they're still carrying around that you might be able to help them with. Feel the warmth, heart to heart, soul to soul. Loving kindness. Just put your left hand on your chest and your right hand on home. Take some nice deep breaths. Feel that little child with you. And just repeat to yourself silently what I'm saying. I want you to be safe. I want you to be protected. I want you to feel peace. I want you to feel love. Take a nice deep breath. Bring your hands down to your solar plexus, just under your ribs, and breathe. I want you to be safe. I want you to be protected. I want you to feel peace. I want you to feel loved. Nice deep breath. Leave your left hand where it is and your right hand over your shoulder, your left shoulder, and breathe. I want you to be safe. I want you to be protected. I want you to feel peace. I want you to feel loved. Nice deep breath. Come back to your chest. Feeling that child snuggling up against you. We're going to change the words up this time. I will keep you safe. I will protect you. I will bring peace into our life. And I love you. Feel that warmth in your chest. Feel the warmth on your side from your child snuggling against you. Bring your hands about an inch away from your chest and let that warmth spread out. And if you're wearing glasses, can you take them off for a minute? And you're going to clap your hands really hard 3 times. Make it fire. And put your hands over your eyes. Those little eyes have seen some things that they shouldn't have seen, shouldn't have had to see. When you heal those eyes. And relax. This is the child that we want to find. And that's still in there. And you can help find that little child inside. So thank you very much.